Hi class, we're beginning module 7, which is on education. This is chapter 8 in the textbook. Um, it's interesting as we look at education. You've now come through your midterm, uh, the middle of the course. You've looked at the inequality issues, the difference related to gender and race and poverty, and now we're looking at education. There's a real battle on between people who discuss social problems, whether education is truly a social problem. You see, you get to determine that. And as you look at the issues related to education, you're to make that determination of whether education is a social problem or is it all the other social problems that affect education so badly. Now, there's clearly many problems with our educational system. Um, you are college students. The new standard is this bachelor's degree in the United States. That's why you're here. Um, so many jobs require a bachelor's degree that in the past only required a high school diploma. It's very different today. And does everyone need college? Does everyone deserve college? Should it be free? The New York system just added for those middle class and lower free tuition. Is it really free? Then there's other things attached to it. In fact, you still have student fees, you still have room and board, you still have the obligation that you must stay within your state during that process for equal years that they put into your system. Not a bad thing. Better than what Pennsylvania has, right? When we think about it, we don't support higher education in the way that it was supported. And is that an issue within the process? So the new educational standards of a high school diploma was at one time the educational standard, and now it's become the bachelor's degree. And that means that colleges have changed. But let's look at the other issues and what happened within that perspective. So let me pop over to our PowerPoints. And we'll start with the perspectives as we often do. Why do we have education? What's it there? Well, there are multiple functions of education. Think about it. In the late 1800s, we became one of the first nations to require public education. Was it because we were so invested in education, or were other social issues coming into place? Think about it. The Industrial Revolution was going on in our country. Fewer people needed to be employed to produce the same amount of products. We see the change from farming communities into cities, which also changes the family structure. We also see the change in the fact that everyone in the family needed to work. We also see child labor laws come into effect. In the past, children as young as 6, 7, and 8 entered the mines, even in our own region, to work in the mines in places. They were considered adults at much younger ages. The change in the work environment created a new society. It also, you'll find, when we look at family, reduce the number of children, even without contraceptive issues coming into place, because we didn't need as many children to do the things as before. Now, remember, children were property, and the children would be, girls were often sent to mills where they lived, and their income was sent home to their family. They were basically almost like slave labor in that process. So when child labor laws come into place, what are we going to do with those children? Well, according to this thought process, we can see clearly that there were multiple reasons for having education come into place. The manifest function, that's the intended consequences, was to educate increased personal development and proper socialization, making people equal. That education was the great equalizer, bringing people up, giving them the chance. Even as you've done your discussion boards, you've seen this, it's talked about the fact of how important education is with each of these topics. When we look at poverty, when we look at the involvement of the differences of gender, and we look at issues related to even aging, education comes into play. That the point was that we improve people's lives, but there is a latent function, and that is the public babysitter coming into place. What do we do with these kids when they're no longer in the workforce? And who's going to take care of them? You see, the stay-at-home mom wasn't really there, and I would always recommend that you read the book from Stephanie Kuntz, a sociologist whose title is The Way We Never Were. That book's located in the library, but it looks at the fact that women were always working, and this changing society puts them more in that control to be able to stay home with industrialization coming into place, but they were working in other areas. So who's going to watch the children? So schools entered that force. We also see the juvenile court system rise up during this time period because kids are not going to school, and therefore we have juvenile offenders, and we have this push to get kids back into school and get them out of gangs and not cause trouble. You see, if they're in school, then they're less likely to be causing other problems on the street. The functionalists argue that these additional tasks make it difficult to accomplish education's primary task, which is education. You can see that's pretty hard to do when you're doing a lot of babysitting, reinforcing, teaching people, and in our cases today, oftentimes even covering feeding and maintaining children that are not in safe environments. So this perspective looks at it very closely. From the conflicts perspective, conflicts theorists said education is not an equalizer but a divider, and it divides the haves from the have-nots. And we can see that as people improve with that education, the significant differences between the two roles. And we start to see the power play coming into place. When we look at power roles, education is a significant piece in who has the power, even in work environments, as well as even in the structure of family and general organization. Education creates the organizational child who is carefully instructed and supervised. If we were in the classroom, I'd have you all get up and move around. Who tells you to sit into seats? We give you the structure of society in the classroom. By the time you get to college, we actually find that children are less creative, or you as young adults or middle-aged adults are less creative because we are so instructed to fit to conformity. We discourage that individuality, that it takes away that difference. And people who are different are judged in a different perspective as well. And so in this perspective, the uniqueness is now sometimes a stigma process that can come into place to judge someone. So there's some very issues that come into place as we look at the perspectives and education. The interactionist perspectives focuses on how classroom dynamics and the practice to educate the perfect student at the same time creates the not so perfect one. And so we see the differences arising. And we also see what we teach in the process may not be education itself, but maybe teaching you how to get around things. How oftentimes you may not be actually looking for that education piece, but how to create the best grade out there. So the interaction between student and teachers reinforces the structure of inequality. It's interesting as we start looking at this, who has rules and how we put into place. You know, do you call me Jan? Do you call me Dr. Perk? That's a process out there. And you can see that standards, that we don't see people at equal levels. And we also have this tracking where students are identified as college bound versus work bound. And we can see the division that comes into place. So as you look at these perspectives, you can see how some of the concerns about education arise. But what are the social problems? Well, there's so many problems. It's hard to cover them all. I could have you watch a number of really good videos that have been made for the general public, even winning Academy Awards related to the problems at school. Waiting for Superman is a video on the new education system and trying to get out of bad schools into charter schools, and whether that's the solution. Right now, with our current administration, we're looking at eliminating the Department of Education. We're looking at funding very differently public school systems. So these are big social changes that are coming into place that will create social problems and may resolve social problems. Remember, one solution may also create a problem in a different way. So when we look at this, we are basically a country that was considered at risk in 1983. Now that's a long time ago. And we found widespread failures of the educational system. And we think about this. In the 1960s, people who weren't making it in the school systems were just thrown out of them in the process. And so we have those truant officer situations, but we also have that they were expelled from school, and people with disabilities weren't even allowed into school. And so then in the 1960s and 70s, we opened the door to more diverse populations, and we could see that there were significant problems. The relative poor performance of American students versus the rest of the world, it really came into play. We had declining scores and weakness in our schools and our educators. Now, is this due to the fact that we had a poor education system? Or is it due to the fact that we changed who was in the school system? Or was it due to the changing world of the United States? So some sociologists contend that the crisis in public education is manufactured by the politicians and the educational experts and the business leaders. They are really the social problems that are facing the whole world. The social and economic inequalities that occur in our countries and others, and especially the build of that in our country. It's very different when the BA is the norm, or the BS is the norm of society, a bachelor's degree, and you're required it, and you don't have that economic funding to get there. And again, this is a population that the poorest may have more opportunity than the working poor, and even the middle class, the lower middle class, to get to educational possibilities that we fund at different levels. So, big things to consider. But let's say there is a basic social problem. We can see basic literacy rates, and we're talking about around the world here, are very problematic, and women account for 75% of adults worldwide that cannot read. Now, what's interesting is when we think about basic literacy, we have to bring it back to our country itself as well, and know that there are basically literacy problems in the United States. About 43% of all Americans demonstrate below or basic literacy levels. When I was a hospital social worker writing information for families on stroke and Parkinson's, I was needing to keep it at the 4th grade level. As we look at students entering universities today, we say that we need to keep the reading level about ninth grade level of reading, that we're failing to support this basic literacy, and that becomes very problematic. U.S. spends more on education than higher income countries, but our literacy scores are average with the world in comparison. Very interesting as we view education versus other countries. And as we look at the change in places like Finland, who have brought their education standards significantly up the mark, they value their educators and their students at a very different level. Social class has a significant place in the examination of the education system. Poor children begin school less prepared, they struggle more, they often are there and face lower scores on their generalized testing, and that affects their SATs and ACTs for college. It's the most powerful predictor of student achievement is our social class. It's interesting when we look at children achievement, it is not the number of books that are read to them, it's the number of books they own. So you can see the social economic piece coming into place. There are gender differences within school. We know that more females are graduating with their bachelor's today. Males are more likely, however, to pursue careers in science, math, and engineering than females, even though girls can achieve those at levels. Part of that is part of the education system. So we see the issues of gender, of race and ethnicity coming through in the educational system. We see the stereotypes confirmed within the process of education. We see violence in education. And so we worry about the climate of schools and what is happening within that. And we see violence in society across the board there. There are more, in recent years, there were fewer school-associated violent deaths, but more deaths per event. And so that what we see reporting again is, and we'll talk about this in crime, is some of the scariness of society because we hear more about it. We see some real issues related to gay and lesbian, transgender and queer, as we look at the social climate in school. And so there are multiple things that have come into place. Our book talks about No Child Left Behind, which was started under the Bush administration, and how it has failed to meet the needs of society, and that's part of what the current administration is continuing to work at eliminating and letting each state go back to running their own school system. The problem then is the inequality between states comes into play. We've promoted such systems as Head Start and pre-K. You know those are in place. And we look at the changing world here, especially of some new programs out there for anti-violence and anti-bullying programs that, again, remember, bullying is usually the result of diversity. So if they're ethnically different or gender issues and what goes on and the difference that comes into place. But I want you especially here to consider the social problem of your college debt. A significant piece within our educational system in the United States. If we were part of the European Union, you would have the ability to go to any college you wanted, basically tuition free, if you are on the track for college. You see, that track system comes into place, but that's significantly different. You, in many cases, when I ask classes to how many are going through that they will have no debt when they leave college, 90% of the students will have some debt when they leave college that they will be repaying, and oftentimes well into your 30s and 40s. That changes your economic standing throughout. So education becomes a very, very important part for you to study. So let's look at what you're doing this week. As we've reviewed what you've already read here, you will read it in a little more detail. I'd like you to view this TED Talk by Sir Ken Robinson. And he talks about what's wrong with the American school system, or school systems in general, how it kills creativity. A great TED Talk. And then the price of admission to college. So I want you to even think about how you fit into this problem as you start examining what is going on with the educational system worldwide. Now, with that said, your discussion board for the week is here, and you'll notice our American schools in crisis. I'd like you to really explain why you believe it and why you don't. Make sure you support your statements and cite those sources. With that, I hope you have a great day, and we will move forward more than halfway through the class now. So you know that we're winding down. Have a great day.